Bitterness and hate campaigns multiply bitterness and hate. And the goal of nonviolence is to be not the opposite of violence, but to be a cure for violence and to give an alternative. And so if we say we're going to be nonviolent, we can't choose those things that continue to multiply hate. Now, here's the thing. When we hear about people hating other people, and when we hear about bitterness, it's difficult because we want to defend and we feel like we have to stand up for ourselves. And it's very a very hard concept to see love as a way of defending ourselves, because love is often seen as just overly sentimental and emotional. But when we think about love in its active form, love is nonviolence is not love in action. So when we consider that, then we're saying, hey, I don't have to respond with bitterness in order to get back at people. My goal is not to get back at people. We have to shift a lot of definitions. When we say justice in nonviolence, we're not talking about retaliation. We're not talking about punishment. When we say justice in nonviolence, we're talking about love correcting so that we can get back to love. So when we think about it that way, bitterness won't get us there, and hate campaigns won't get us there. We have to make an active choice, a conscious choice to say, I will not be a part of multiplying that thing that I say I stand against. That's why it's so important to embrace these principles. For me personally, nonviolence keeps me from being unjust in response to injustice, because then I become a hypocrite. If I say I'm for love and then I'm unloving, that's hypocritical. Even when it's in response to someone who hates me, I still don't have a ground to stand on if I respond to their hate with hate. And so hate and bitterness magnify hate and bitterness. When I make the alternate choice, which is nonviolence and love, then I'm on a path to eradicate hate and to eradicate bitterness. But I can't do that. I can't move out bitterness with bitterness. I can't move out hate with hate. I'm just supplanting that other person's hate with my own.
Welcome to tonight's Better Together and Beloved Community Talks presentation. I am Damian Madison, the project manager for the King Center's Interfaith Initiative, Better Together. We are so glad you are chosen to join us tonight for this great conversation, this special King Holiday Observance, BCT, Beloved Community Talk. We are glad to have you here. Why we can't wait, building community, uniting a nation, the nonviolent way. We would love to know where you're tuning in from. So as you join in, please stop, drop in the chat right now where you're watching from, where you're joining from. We would love to know where you're watching from on tonight so we can virtually touch and be in community. So go ahead and drop in the chat where you're watching from right now. We would love to greet you, say hello. We are so glad to have you here on tonight. Also, while you're watching, please feel free to like, share with your colleagues, your friends, your social media sphere of influence, so we can spread why we can't wait, building community, the uniting nation, the nonviolent way. We are so glad to have you here tonight. Well, family, it's time for us to go ahead and get to our conversation for tonight. Published in 1964, Why We Can't Wait challenges complacency and emphasizes the urgency of confronting racial injustice through nonviolent resistance. As societal inequities persist and new challenges emerge, revisiting King's insights provides valuable guidance for contemporary activism and policy reform. So in alignment with the 2026 King Holiday Observance theme, Mission Possible 2, Building Community, Uniting a Nation, the Nonviolent Way, this Beloved Community Talk, BCT, explores the continued urgency within Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s prophetic text, Why We Can't Wait. I am so glad to have you here tonight. We are glad to have you here tonight. I'm going to have our CEO, Dr. Brent A. King, and the entire King Center family. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And now I'm going to present and introduce our moderator for the evening, Dr. Terrence Lester. Dr. Lester is a storyteller, a public scholar, speaker, community activist, and author. He is the founder and director of Love Beyond Walls, a nonprofit organization focused on raising awareness about poverty and homelessness and on community mobilization. He received his PhD with a concentration in public policy and social change from Union Institute and University. Tonight, I introduce our moderator for the evening, Dr. Terrence Lester.
Thank you, Pastor Madison. I am grateful to be here, and I want to extend a great evening to each of you all who are present. I want to welcome you to this beloved community talk, grounded in the 2026 King Holiday Observance theme, Mission Possible 2, Building Community, Uniting a Nation the Nonviolent Way. Tonight, as we gather, not merely just to remember Dr. Martin Luther King, but to be confronted by him. But before we do so, I would like to pause to honor the life of Claudette Colvin, born September 5th, 1939, who has made her transition. As a teenager, Miss Colvin acted with moral clarity long before the world was ready to see her, reminding us that the movement was carried not only by celebrated leaders, but by young people whose courage and conviction helped bend history towards justice. And Why We Can't Wait, King dismantles what he calls the dangerous myth of a more convenient season. He exposes how delay, complacency, and incrementalism undermine justice. Waiting becomes a way of avoiding the cost of moral courage. It numbs the conscience. It domesticates urgency. It turns freedom into something perpetually postponed. But King was quite equally clear about what it means and what it must be for us not to delay. He taught that the aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community. The aftermath of nonviolence is redemption. The aftermath of nonviolence is reconciliation. He warned us that we risk becoming, in his words, a civilization guided with guided missiles and misguided people. Today, our nation is fractured along with racial, political, economic, and spiritual lines. Polarization, disinformation, dehumanization, and fear are widening our divides. Public trust is actually eroding. And grounded in Mission Possible 2, this beloved community talk examines how King's urgent framework provides a roadmap for national healing and transformational unity. It invites leaders and everyday people to reclaim their agency, to rise above division and work together to build a nation rooted in justice, in dignity, and non-violent power. As we honor King tonight, it is my honor to be joined by three voices whose lives and leadership embody the moral seriousness of this call. These abbreviated bios cannot fully capture the depth of their work, but I do want to acknowledge each of them and start our discussion. First, I would like to acknowledge Reverend Tracy D. Blackman. Reverend Blackman is a nationally respected pastor, public theologian, justice advocate, and Reverend Blackman stands in the prophetic tradition of the Black church where faith is never separated from freedom and theology is never detached from the cries of the oppressed. We also have with us Rabbi Stephen Lebo. Rabbi Lebo is a lifelong rabbi, scholar, and justice-centered leader. Rabbi Lebo's ministry has been shaped by the memory of the Holocaust, the wounds of racial terror in the American South, and an unwavering commitment to human dignity. And last, we are joined by Reverend Dr. Vanetta L. West, a senior nonviolence educator with the King Center, a cultural strategist, and a global teacher of the Kingian philosophy. Dr. West has devoted her life to cultivating what King called the discipline of love. And I would like to welcome my panelists at this time. So tonight, good evening. Good evening. How's everybody doing? Awesome. Together tonight, we are grappling with answering this question. If the time is always right to do right, what does faithfulness require us to do right now? And we're going to begin this dialogue with a core message. King is kind of addressing the temptation of for us to delay justice as a society, right? To postpone moral courage, to confuse comfort with peace. And he's insisting that waiting becomes a weapon of the status quo. And so I want to start off by asking the panelists this question. What motivated Dr. King to emphasize the theme of waiting as unacceptable? And how does this resonate today? And any of my panelists can jump in.
Sure. I think in a good evening, everyone. Good evening again to everyone tuning in. And thank you, Dr. Lester, for the introduction. It's an honor to be in this space this evening. I think in a main part of the book, when Dr. King talks about waiting, he had been told in a letter from 8 Alabama clergy that he needed to wait for an appointed time to lead Black people in achieving civil rights. They questioned his form of action, what he was doing with nonviolence, and so he responded in an urgent matter, in a very strategic matter, in the letter from Birmingham jail, and stated, the time is always ripe to do what's right. And he said we must use time creatively before that. And so he was that what preceded these statements is the kind of idea that we need to wait for justice. And so he gives historical context in saying it's been a number of years since the emancipation, and the Negro, his phrase during that time, was still not free and was in fact witnessing freedom movements in Africa, the land that we were stolen from, and they were witnessing that and still did not fully have their own freedom. And so he said that the time is always ripe to do right.
I can jump in if you like. So we're talking about gradualism, incrementalism, which is really, we can't do that right now, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And not to tattle on my own community too much, but those in the white community who said not now, often they meant not ever. And waiting was kind of used as an excuse and an impediment to delay and to not address, I guess, the underlying issues of justice, morality, and just at the end of the day, doing the right thing. That's what waiting was keeping us from doing.
Yeah. Reverend Blackman?
Sure. Thank you for having me here. And I agree with what my co-panelists have said. I think a lot of this, in my mind, is what you learn on the journey, right? You start to know how people think. You start to know the tactics. And Dr. King is speaking as someone who has had time to reflect on the journey. He's responding to this persistent demand that Black people be patient, that we wait on the courts, that we wait on legislature, that we wait on public opinion, that we wait on people to. And he comes to a realization. Now, maybe he always had it, but I read it as though he comes to a realization that waiting is not neutral, that it is a tactic used to preserve injustice. And he looks at how, once they passed integration, then the Supreme Court goes back and puts in the pupil law, all these things that keep us going backwards and forwards. And he is speaking to say, waiting time is up. And it hits me uniquely in this moment because it resonates with calls that we have now to slow down on reform and to prioritize unity over justice, or less polarized moment, right? When I don't perceive Dr. King as juxtaposing justice on unity, and it is a matter that he uses the word justice in an expanded understanding of the word to mean right relationship, right? It's not that I'm trying to win a court case, is that I'm trying to stand for what I believe my faith has called me to stand for. And there's an urgency about that because generations are being subjected to the same harm that their ancestors had. And so I'll stop there, but I just read it as someone wise enough to have read tea leaves and said, enough of this, we need to do something different.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is that King treats time as moral and not
Yeah.
merely chronological, right? It
Yes.
the this moral ethic dictates our urgency. We must act now, and it also lets me though that waiting is not necessarily passive in his framework, um, because when we wait, it actually shapes what we tolerate, right? What is normalized, what we allow to be normalized, and that dictates what we ultimately become. So my follow up question to the panel is: how does King differentiate between just and unjust laws, and why is this distinction important?
Well, I'll start and get out of the way. I think Dr. King defines just laws as those that align with moral law, that align with human dignity, and that apply equally to everyone. Unjust laws degrade humans, enforce inequality, and are imposed without the consent of those that are affected. So the distinction is crucial because it establishes that legality is not the same as morality. Both slavery and segregation were legal at one time, and they were never moral. Denying non white, non male citizens the right to vote was legal, but it was never moral. And so King is making this distinction that laws reflect power and history, but they don't always reflect ethics. And legal has never been the same thing as right. And again, because I'm living in this moment right now, the political waters are even murkier now. So when we see the current immigration policy in this nation, it's not legal and it's not moral. Or suspending SNAP benefits, or congressional approval being withheld for disaster funds. In St. Louis, we had a tornado. We're still waiting on funds. It's not legal or moral. And so, this distinction between just and unjust laws provides an ethical grounding for civil disobedience. It provides an ethical grounding for challenging blind obedience to systems that harm. And without this framework that he offers, we are subject to becoming numb to injustice. And when we become numb to injustice, then it gets to hide behind the illusion of law and order. So I think he goes to great lengths to make sure that we understand that just because it's legal doesn't mean it's moral. And we're called to a higher moral standard than sometimes we have reached in our humanity.
Yeah, you mentioned numbness. Dr. West, could you speak about how that numbness is showing up in the present moment? Um,
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a paralyzing apathy that a
mm,
lot of people are experiencing, not knowing what to do. And it's not that people don't care, it's that there are so many things happening at once, is one of the issues. And then there's also so many painful things. I don't think we really truly examine the trauma of what we're witnessing, of the things that we're seeing on the streets of this country and throughout the world that human beings were never made to have to grapple with. It's hard to face the fact that we're living so far below our capacity as human beings and so far below the spark of divinity that each of us carries. That Dr. King understood that. Nobody in my study, to me, is able to convey why we are where we are better than Dr. King. And the things he said about why we are where we are the things he said you know, decades ago, they're still relevant today. Still, people are facing having to break unjust laws. And as he said in this book, Why We Can't Wait, just laws that are applied unjustly, where our state and our government will take a law and cause it to be applied unjustly. That's why he was in jail in Birmingham. They tried to cause an issue, the government did, the local authorities did, by putting this law before him, that in order to get to the justice that he wanted and that the people wanted, he had to break that law. And so that's something people are facing today. Mass civil disobedience, he said in his last book, is what we'll have to do. But there's so many people who are numb. It's hard, day in and day out. I have to do affirmations and reaffirm my personal commitment to the work of justice and to infusing society with love. And the other thing that contributes to that is the level of media that we consume. That's the opposite of who we were created to be. And it's hard to balance that, right? Because you want to be informed, but sometimes you have to step away and say, I don't know if I want to be this informed. Because then you're facing these diabolical attacks on humanity. And it's rough to face. So I just want to really emphasize that a lot of people appear to be apathetic, or may be apathetic, because it's hard to handle, not because many people are uncaring. I think we have to do the things to build the will, as Dr. King and Mrs. Coretta Scott King taught, to get to the justice that we want to see.
Yeah. You said something really important about numbness and how that is connected to trauma. And a simple definition of trauma is anything that overwhelms the brain to cope with reality. That's trauma. And when you have all sorts of things converging on you at once, it can overwhelm you where you have no capacity in your mental space to cope with what is happening. That can do a number of things. It can cause you to be overwhelmed. It can cause you to disconnect from community, right? It can cause you to turn your head away from the issues that may be pressing and overwhelming to the lives of people who are being harmed by unjust policies. And I would like to follow up with a question to Rabbi Lebo. In what ways does the concept of nonviolent resistance serve as a moral and strategic approach in this present moment?
Nonviolent resistance it's the moral approach. And Dr. King pointed us in that direction over and over and over again. He said that we could be an army, but that we would be armed with love, decency, compassion, forgiveness. And as was mentioned earlier, if we return hate for hate, if we think that's the response, then we actually degrade ourselves and our own souls. So the way, ultimately, the key to our redemption, not just spiritually, but politically, is to see ourselves as an army, but an army that's full of love.
Yeah. Reverend Blackman, do you have a follow-up? And I would like to know from you specifically, what ways does nonviolence actually demand us to act internally and externally, right? Spiritually, psychologically, ethically, but also externally in terms of training and strategy and discipline and coalition?
That's an excellent question. We all know that nonviolence is not passive. And sometimes when I talk about nonviolence in the context of community, that's what people hear. You want me to do nothing. But actually, nonviolence is a call to do everything. It's just to not be violent, right? So it's a call that affirms the humanity of both the oppressed and the oppressor. And to do that is more difficult than to strike at the person you want to strike at, or to meet, as Dr. West said, to meet that antagonistic nature with your own antagonistic nature. Dr. King understood that nonviolence was not passive resistance, it was disciplined resistance, disciplined with courageous action that creates, that creates crisis, but doesn't make it chaotic. And when you were talking just now, Dr. Lester, I love your definition of trauma. And I've been thinking about this a lot. I have to pull myself away from social media. I have to pull myself away from the TV because the way we communicate with one another now is overwhelming in and of itself. If you're just, it's coming at you so rapidly from all different angles. You don't get a break unless you step away for breath yourself. And it would have you think that either you are overwhelmed and just enraged by it, or you are overwhelmed and paralyzed by it, because it does not seem that there's any way that we could take control of that. And so I'm a big advocate for nonviolence. As a person of faith, I think that nonviolence is the only choice we have because our goal is never annihilation. Our goal is reconnection and redemption. That is the mandate of our faiths, no matter what faith it is. I, I don't know if I'm answering is what you are asking me, but that's how I was triggered with that question. Nonviolence refuses to mirror violence, but it exposes its cruelty because it offers a different way of being.
Yeah. And at this present moment, we desperately need a different way of being. Dr. West, could you talk about how that different way of being can actually converge or take on this challenge that Dr. King is actually asking us to take hold to, which is the moral urgency of now? Could you speak to that?
It's going to require that we change our mindsets. It will require a revolution in our thinking, a revolution in our spirits. Those are the components of ourselves that is such a struggle to deal with right now. We can see that, right, by how taken off guard people were by a simple act of compassion from a reporter a few nights ago in Jacksonville, who simply encouraged a football coach. And reporters, other media, they're up in arms because in their profession right now, compassion is a foreign concept. And so we're facing a time where we're going to have to be some things that we may seldom see. And so in order to do that, we'll have to condition ourselves. Nonviolence is very much about conditioning. It is the everyday, who do I want to be on this earth? What atmosphere do I want to bring? And Dr. King gave us these principles to help us with that so that we can align ourselves with a way of thinking that will help us not be the monsters. And when I say monsters, I mean forces and the evil that we're seeing out there, because it can be dangerous. One of the things that concerns me most about myself, not about other people, is guarding against becoming the injustices that I see. Sure. And nonviolence helps me not do that. It helps me be in a place where my soul is okay. And I don't know about anybody else, but my soul is important to me. And so I have to be sure that I don't allow the injustices and inhumanity and hate that I see to corrupt my soul. Because as Mrs. Coretta Scott King said, hate injures the hater more than it injures the hated. And I think that the spiritual dynamics of that are so astounding that if I don't condition my being to not only be a nonviolent practitioner in trying to get social change, but in my everyday life, then I'm damaging and endangering my soul.
Yeah, it's a intrinsic examination, but also a social examination. And I think to understand the urgency and why we can't wait, we have to remember that King is writing from and is responding to the context that he was in. King is writing with the Birmingham in view, right? This lens. And it wasn't just a location, it was this moral mirror, right? And it exposed what happens when a society treats justice as negotiable, right? And delays taking full responsibility of the urgency of now. And I guess my follow-up question, and I'll call on Rabbi Lebo, is how did the events in Birmingham actually exemplify the themes of urgency and nonviolent protests?
Well, as you said, unfortunately, it was 8 clergymen, including one rabbi, who reached out and said, it's not now, it's not the right time. And Dr. King taught us that it's always the right time. Now is the right time. And he was willing to put himself on the line, as were others, when he went to jail. And he saw himself really in I guess you would say moral, not mortal, but moral combat. He taught us really to oppose evil, but not other people, to hate hatred, but not to hate others. And that's a difficult soul response, but that's what he taught us to do.
Yeah. Anyone else? I think Birmingham makes visible what King is insisting, right? That injustice does not correct itself. And sometimes the passivity can cause us to say, well, maybe one day something will happen, or maybe, the injustice will just go away. And I think injustice has to be confronted. And it requires organization. It requires soul care, as Dr. West lifted up. It requires sacrifice, but it also requires moral resolve. And I guess my follow-up question is, what lessons from Why We Can't Wait are still applicable in today's fight for racial justice?
So, Dr. Lester, I don't know if you know this, but I'm a child of Birmingham, Alabama. So when I read about,
I did not know that.
Yes. So when I read about, the Gaston Hotel, I know that hotel well. I know A.G. Gaston well. And I think something that people don't talk about when they talk about this King era of Birmingham is that all Black people in Birmingham were not, quote unquote, suffering. Like, there were people in Birmingham who had economic means. There were people in Birmingham who were in neighborhoods that were safe for Black folk. Yes, it was segregated, but you had segregation also with class overlay, right? So you had some Black people who were living well and some Black people who were not living as well. And there were places where you couldn't go if you were Black, but you could live a pretty full life in just those places. I'm saying this is because a part of what Dr. King also challenges us to is to not fall for the selective few. Understand that we all deserve equality. We all deserve justice. And it's not good enough that I happen to be. I mean, A.G. Gaston was owned by a Black millionaire. There was money in Birmingham, right? But the cause for which King put his life on the line was not for the selective few. And if I look at scripture, I always think, when I think about that, I think about 2 Kings, when the Babylon exile happened, right? And if you read the text carefully, it doesn't say that the Babylonians took all of the Israelites. It says that they took the artisans, and they took the craftsmen, and they took the visionaries, and they took the workers. They left some people in the rubble. And what I love about Dr. King is that he was not one who would leave anyone in the rubble. What he is calling us to is to see the divine sanctity and sacredness of all life, even those who don't get it yet, right? And this is a higher calling than sometimes we have to resist. We have to resist the temptation to be okay when we're okay. What King was saying is, we can't be okay until everybody is okay, right? That's oppressor and oppressed. Because, if we tell the truth, the face of the oppressor changes depending on the context. And this is a move to bring everyone into the fullness of what it means to live as God's creation.
If I can add to that, I think that's an answer back to the previous question you asked Dr. Lester about Birmingham, because Dr. King, when they gave him a hard time in that statement from 8 Alabama clergy, he said, "I am here because injustice is here," which is, supporting what Reverend Blackman just shared, that Dr. King had this idea that we all belong to each other and with each other, that we're interconnected, interdependent, and interrelated. And so in his response to those clergy, in the letter from Birmingham jail, he says, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And we are caught. And I imagine that just the visual of that for me, being caught and tied, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. If we could get the urgency of that, the need for us to realize that we're caught and tied together, I think that would impact how we engage each other, even on social media, particularly in policies, in policing, in all of these areas of human life. If I determine that this person that I'm approaching is someone that I'm caught and tied with, that whatever happens to them affects me and whatever happens to me affects them, I think that would change some dynamics in our society. But instead of that, we see ourselves so often as separate when we're all in this together. Some of us are facing some more difficult times than others because of historical injustices and current injustices, but we're caught and tied. I think that's a phrase that we should just magnify and keep reminding ourselves.
Yes, we are.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I just wanted to piggyback on Dr. West to say, I think the images of Dr. King with Rabbi Heschel, with Muslims, all of that speaks to this understanding that humanity is intricately tied. And, his letter to those clergymen, I read it as his lifeline to them. It wasn't, "I'm done with you."
No.
It was, "I need you to understand because you think that you are okay, but you really aren't okay until everybody's okay."
Yes. Yeah. Everybody. It should move us that there are families right now that still have empty refrigerators and are facing food insecurity. It should bother us that people are living in food deserts, that the unhoused community right now is sleeping outside. It should bother us that people are being impacted in the educational space. It should bother us that families are being divided and people are being snatched off the streets. We just saw the murdering of a young lady in another state, in another city. It should move us because we live, as King describes it, a world house, right? And King's leadership is moral, but it's also deeply spiritual and not just political. He is forming people and shaping our conscious and calling communities to a higher standard of love and truth through our being interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent of one another. And I want to follow up with a question for Rabbi Lebo is, how does King use moral and religious rhetoric to strengthen us and his call to action?
He strengthens us, and he's clear that it's not just Dr. King, that he is preaching from an ancient tradition, Old Testament and New Testament, and that when he uses biblical concepts, he talks about love in the New Testament called agape. He strengthens what he says because it's deeply rooted in both the Judeo-Christian tradition and in any tradition of spirituality. And I'll just to revolve back to what you said is it should bother us. It should bother us, the country that we live in. We live in a country that has the most, and yet we cannot take care of those who have the least. And that's something that, were he still alive today, I think Dr. King would continuously point out that there are those that have been left behind horribly and terribly.
Yeah. Reverend Blackman, what leadership lessons can current and future activists actually draw from Dr. King's approach in this present moment?
That's an excellent question. Um, I think we could learn a lot from Dr. King led from the center.
Mm.
He led with proximity to pain. He didn't just talk about pain, he lived in the middle of people who were actually experiencing pain, and he listened to what they had to say. I think we could learn a lot from that. I think we could learn a lot from the leadership style of Dr. King. We elevate him, we elevate him, but he did not elevate himself.
Right.
He had a team that he worked with. He had ministers that could call him into account, strategists that he was working with. The accolades that came to Dr. King came because of those who applied them in the way that they did. He certainly was a leader and he deserves those accolades, but he did not lead as a lone ranger. He never left people behind. I think we could learn something from, in the book of Thessalonians, which is a Second Testament text, when Paul is giving his closing salutation to the church in Thessalonica, he's imprisoned and he says, "Give my love to everyone, especially the saints in Caesar's house." I think Dr. King never forgot that there could be saints in Caesar's. No one was beyond his touch. No one was beyond his conversation or his outreach. He believed in the humanity and the goodness of all people. And even if you were not acting in your best self, his goal was never annihilation. It was reclamation and redemption and reconnection. And I think we could learn something from that. I get concerned. I'm in lots of spaces. We are in the fight for our lives, but I get concerned when the conversation is only about how we're going to beat, how we're going to win, right? Because the reason that we keep coming back to this place is that we have not learned that we are all connected. And there's root work that we have to do to understand that winning for us has to be reclamation of humanity. It has to be being able to see one another as valuable and worthy. It has to be us putting in the front of our minds what benefits the whole and not just us, and a calling of account on those actions. And I think Dr. King lived his life and died for those principles. And we still have not been able to do it better. There's only one person in my faith tradition that's done it better, and he did it with only 12 folk. So I'm saying Jesus, had this same kind of principle. Gandhi had this same kind of principle. Rabbi Heschel had this same kind of principle. And we can learn a lot from people who are not out to destroy, but who are out to build, and to heal. We got a long way to go because we're mad right now. We're mad. And we're mad justifiably, but we cannot let our anger take our humanity, because then we've lost.
Yeah. What stands out to me is the word build, but also the term reconnection. And I would like for you, Dr. West, to kind of speak to those two terms, because right now it just seems so polarized where reconnection doesn't feel obtainable. And so how do we actually reconnect in this present moment? How do we build in this present moment? And how can diverse communities actually unite around shared moral values to affect this change?
I believe we need a robust communication movement. I think one of the things that we're absolutely facing is that we don't know how we were connected before, that all we see is the present and the more recent history. But human beings have been here for thousands of years. And we didn't come divided. We created divisions. They're human made. And even when you go to sacred texts, we'll find some ways to say it's divine for us to be separated. But the God who is love is calling us to a place of not false unity, but to a place of unity and a place of true peace, where we're not willing for each other to suffer. And it's hard if we don't envision that. And I really believe we're currently so conditioned to put negative into the atmosphere, even in our virtual spaces, that we have to kind of come back and face this darkness that we're seeing with light. That's the only thing that's going to drive it out. Now, that seems hard because we think about changing the world so often that we don't think that driving out darkness with light starts in my conversation, starts in my social media engagement, starts in how I talk to my partner or my spouse, my children, my coworkers, starts with how I engage my elected officials, starts with how elected officials engage those who elected them or who are in their districts or areas. And so if we just start to say to each other, the way that we're engaging each other right now is wholly unacceptable. And I still have hope for that. I just think it has to be a critical mass of people putting that out there and then willing to back it up with the action and the advocacy to make the type of world that we want a reality. But as long as Reverend Blackman pointed out, we stay in the fray and participate in darkness, we can't drive it out. And so we're having to make some choices today. Everyone's facing this choice. Dr. King gave us that choice in his last book, Chaos or Community. And we get to decide today. So I encourage everyone who's watching this right now to make a choice, if you haven't already, that you're going to participate in community and build community, build the beloved community, which isn't a utopia. It's real. You know, we can get there. We can achieve this beloved community together, but we have to want it. And that goes back to building the will. And if everybody watching today would make a choice and say, I'm going to change my language, I'm going to shift how I engage people, I'm going to pay more attention to policies and work to change policies, there are some points that we could get to where we could start to say, hey, everybody, look at this social media movement. It's about something other than beating and defeating people. If we dig into that third principle of nonviolence, I just want to say this, that we seek to defeat injustice and not people. I think that's so critical to us getting where we would want to be as human beings.
So Dr. West, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, definitely, Rabbi.
Sure. So Dr. West, talked about light and darkness. Prophet Isaiah says the people always walk in darkness, but eventually they'll see a great light. And that's what we're talking about tonight. And what is that great light? You referenced it already. It's that mutuality, that interdependentness, the recognition that we all belong to that beloved community, even those people that don't realize that they belong to that community. It's been said we came over on different ships, but we're now all in the same boat. And scripture says how good and how sweet it is when brothers and sisters can sit together in peace. That should be our theme and our motto and our thought, not just from the pulpit, but in the classroom, everywhere we go, and on social media has been said how good and how sweet it is when we can actually sit together in peace.
Yeah, one of the things that I hear is community and how hope actually derives from community. And as we shift towards more actionable insights, I would like to ask this question of the panelists: what practical steps, like right now, tangible practical steps, can individuals and organizations take today to embody these principles outlined in the book and throughout our discussion?
One of the first things I would mention, and I want to mention this and just turn it over to everybody, I think it's so critical right now that we are well. And I'm encountering so many people who are not okay. And it's hard to talk about transforming systems and society, and you're not okay. You're struggling mentally, you're struggling physically, you're struggling spiritually. And we would be sometimes, it's almost as though we believe we don't deserve self-care and to care for our mental health. And I'm talking to somebody who 3 months ago, my doctor was like, do you need a pill? Do you need something? Because I went into the doctor in such a place where she was like, you're really struggling through some things. Well, what had happened to me was I was going through this time where I looked at all this traumatic stuff and was trying to work to change things, but I wasn't taking care of myself. And I just want to encourage people, don't watch every video that pops up. You know that there's injustice in the world. You don't have to see every instance of it. If you want to be educated, read about some things and then watch some things. You don't want to be uninformed, but you also want to be strategically informed in a way that you can take care. That's important, because what we're looking at now is a bunch of people, some of them, many of them, facing mental health crises that are situational, brought on by the tragedy that we're seeing in society. And so I would just encourage, as a practical step, to examine your health at this point in every aspect. Is something I'm doing and trying to figure out. What do I need to change in my eating? What do I need to change in my exercising? This is going to be a marathon. We're going to have to do some marching. We're going to have to do some advocacy. We're going to have to do some training, some fundraising, some programs. It's going to take all hands on deck and all aspects of social change work to get to where we need to be. And we need to find some ways as community to practice wellness.
Yeah. To your point before I pass it to Reverend Blackman or Rabbi Lebo, you make me think about the importance of safe spaces to process information as well. And that happens in community because sometimes we have this social media trauma, this digital trauma, right? Where we can pick up these small devices and encounter the world's injustices, right? It's not just the injustice that happened in your community or in your city or the neighboring city. It's the one that happened across the United States. It's the one that happened in another country. It's what this commentator said. It's this influencer attacking another one. And so we are bombarded with all of these things. And the danger is, while we aren't caring for ourselves, is to internalize this and not have an outlet to name what we are processing on the inside. And so it is very healthy to be in community, to be able to name these things and have some life spoken back into you, to have people say that, your feelings are valid, your emotions are valid, but let's process some solutions and some tangible ways for you to continue to care for yourself as we also are caring for each other. I think there's a real threat to people right now also who are in isolation. Isolation is one of the fastest ways to feel overwhelmed, and not to realize that you are interconnected with the world around you. And so I would like to pass it to either Rabbi Lebo or Reverend Blackman for us to name some other things. Okay, yes, Dr. West.
I just wanted to say real quick, I don't want to be insensitive. I do realize, and I always try to be cognizant of the fact that there are people who can't choose self-care. There are people who are facing genocide and who are facing horrific conditions in life where they can't even say, I'm going to practice self-care because they're living in tents and they're living in refugee camps. And so, I just wanted to emphasize that that's something that, for a lack of a better word, we may have the privilege to be able to focus on, but some people don't have that.
Yes. Thank you for naming that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. It makes me think that suicide is on the rise, and it's not on the rise necessarily by people that have nothing. It's by people that have everything. And there's that sense of despair. And as you say, maybe it comes from the news, maybe it comes from the mass media or the social media, but people are looking for meaning. You talk about safe spaces. That's exactly what a church or a synagogue or a mosque should be. We should pray, we should educate, we should meditate, and keep helping people rise up and their souls continue. That's what we need to do as sacred institutions.
Yeah.
I want to just piggyback on a couple of things I heard, and I don't think this is news to anyone. I just want to say them out loud for the people that are listening. Being surrounded by people and being surrounded by information doesn't mean you aren't lonely.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean that you aren't still isolated. I want to also say that everything we are hearing, everything we are seeing is not true.
Right.
So we're dealing with algorithms in ways that we haven't before. And so the system is reading what stimulates us and gives us more of the things that stimulate us, whether they are true or not. My personal testimony, greatest changes I've made in my life, I made them through story. I made them through sitting down with someone over a meal and hearing their story. And so I want to encourage people to have conversations with people you agree with, real conversations. I don't mean keyboard courage, I don't mean texting. I'm talking about ask somebody to go to lunch and spend yourself to listen to their story, not listen to respond, not listen to counter, just to hear where they're coming from, right? And once you begin to do that, then whether you agree with the person or not is set to their humanity in telling the story. Tell your story. Some of us need to start it. We don't even have to leave our house. Some of us are not having conversations in our house. We get on our iPads, we get on our computers, we get on our phones. We're not sitting down at dinner tables and having conversations anymore. Learn how to have conversation. This past Sunday, my business partner and I, I'm going to give her all credit because I went kicking and screaming, but I went. She wanted to start an invitation to people who politically are not aligned with us and open it up. It's just called Talking on a Zoom. That's what she said. I said, well, I'm going to be there, but I'm going to so I don't start, and it was refreshing. 16 people showed up. Some people felt comfortable enough to talk, some people didn't. It wasn't about trying to convince anyone, it was trying to see why we do what we do and why we think the way we think. And what was revealed in a lot of those situations, we have the same concerns, we have the same hurts, we have the same kind of fears. Do you know what I'm saying? You're coming at it from a different level, but we have those same things.
Sure.
And so, my greatest fear is that we lose our humanity. Because whenever a people are dehumanized, tragedy follows.
Mm.
I want us to live higher than that. All annihilation begins with dehumanization.
Absolutely.
Because you have to remove the image of the divine in order to do that to someone else.
Mm.
So I want us to talk more.
And be careful with our language. There's that dehumanization.
Yes.
So much of it is language. That's how we got to slavery. Some people think it was racism, but it was really greed.
It was greed and
a
dehumanization.
desire to build empire. And in order to convince people that it was okay to enslave folks, you had to first dehumanize the people you were planning to enslave. So you had to use language. They're monkeys, they're savages, they're not human. The same language that was used with indigenous people.
I was about to say, and even going back to indigenous people. And so bringing it back to Dr. King, we have many images. We have him concretized with the I have a dream, but we don't talk about what the dream was. We have many him marching in the street. We have many images of the Lorraine Motel, but we don't have the images of him sitting down in people's houses having dinner. Don't have the chicken dinners that he sat with. We don't have the testimonies of people who had actual relationship with Martin Luther King, with Coretta Scott King, with those who were working with them. We don't have the conversations that would allow Mahalia Jackson to be able to say, tell them about the dream. She heard the dream somewhere. There were kitchen conversations, communication. These were not people he just showed up to lead. These are people who followed because he listened to know them. And that's something that we have to do with one another.
Yes. Yes. Wow. As we get ready to wrap up, I want to return, as you said, Reverend Blackman, to King's insistence that waiting is not an option, whether that be connecting with the loved ones or connecting in community, or if you have access to care for yourself, caring for your own sense of soul in that way. And if you also have um, uh, that sense of urgency, those who are unable to care for themselves, standing in solidarity with them, and ensuring that neighbor without an address, neighbor who may have woken up in the tent, neighbor who is food insecure, actually has what they need. And I would like to kind of wrap us up with this question. As we reflect on the book, Why We Can't Wait, what is the most impactful lesson that you would like for our listeners to take away from our conversation? And I'll start with you, Rabbi Lebo.
Sure. There's a rabbi that lived right around the same time as Jesus named Hillel. And he kind of outlined the legacy that we're looking at tonight. He said, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? That's the self-care part. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But it must lead to, if I'm only for myself, then what kind of person am I? And then he ends the quote by saying, but if not now, when? And that's the question. That's what the book leaves me with. If not now, when?
Yes.
A shame.
Dr. West?
I think a great summation of Why We Can't Wait would be found in the way Dr. King lays it out, starting with the historical context of what has happened with a people who has been in the grip of oppression for hundreds of years, and then discovers a way, a teaching, a philosophy that becomes helpful. And so to that end, I would encourage us to study nonviolence, to study it in a way to live it, and to study it in a way to apply it for social change, to begin on a journey where we actually say we have our own pilgrimage to nonviolence, as Dr. King did, and to embrace it in a way that we allow the principles and the steps to guide us strategically in the work that we want to do in our homes, in our schools, in our communities, in our legislative houses, because it's very important, if you're going to do any justice work, to have a strategy. And I believe nonviolence to be a very strategic, love-centered approach that can help us to create the society that is for the collective good, not just for some people to have it good, but for the collective good. And I certainly want to invite people to study nonviolence with the King Center at the kingcenterinstitute.org, and just begin to find out more. You may have heard nonviolence is one thing, but it's not that. You've heard Dr. King is one thing, but he's not that. And so when you read this book, Why We Can't Wait, we find the king that's saying things like, this nation was born in genocide. I mean, we rarely hear that king, but he's talking about this nation was born in genocide when we made the decision that he calls the Native American was an inferior race. And so he's telling us the history. And so another thing would be to understand that history is not a negative thing. If we don't understand it, we can't get to the place we need to get to. And there's such an attempt to erase history now that I think Dr. King can show us how to explore history, even in this book, Why We Can't Wait, in a way that can give us the steps to get to the beloved community.
Yeah, that's an excellent answer. And there is a QR code right there on your screen to learn more information about how to get connected to the King Center and the nonviolent training. And I would like to give Reverend Blackman space to close us out with her final thoughts.
Well, thank you. Thank you for including me. This has been
Thank you.
a stirring conversation. Grateful to have been a part of it. Today, we received a notice that St. Louis Public Schools, which are our largest educational entity for, for grade school kids, is now fully unaccredited.
Mm. Mm.
And there are many children that won't suffer because of that. There are many kids who are in private schools and home schools and who have parents that can make a different choice for them. They won't suffer because our school is unaccredited. But we all will feel the impact of children not having deposited in them all that we can to make them the best that they can be. Justice does not require confrontation. Justice requires courage. And the courage that we need is to fight for those who don't have the ability to fight for themselves. Those who can't be heard as loudly as they scream. Those who depend upon others to help them make a way because the system has been stacked against them all of their lives. And when we let a generation fail to be the best that they can be, then we are all going to reap havoc of that. No one is going to escape that. Dr. King understood that either we build a beloved community or we live in rubble together. I pray that we choose well.
Wow. Such powerful words. I would like to thank Dr. West, Rabbi Lebo, and Reverend Blackman for your wisdom, for your insight tonight. I would like to thank the King Center for hosting this beloved community talk. And to everyone listening tonight, nonviolence is not passivity. It's a call to a fierce urgency of now. A fierce urgency of now. I would like to pass it back to Pastor Madison, and he will give you final instructions as we conclude this beloved community talk. Thank you all.
Well, thank you to all of our wonderful panelists for such information, insight, wisdom, guidance. To our moderator, Dr. Lester, thank you so much for your time and for your words of wisdom as well. I'm going to ask that if you're watching from wherever you are, if you would go ahead and make sure you scan the QR code to your left or right on your screen, and make sure that you connect with us and give us your feedback and your response to tonight's discussion. We thank you so much for being with us on tonight, and we hope that you're inspired and empowered, and you are encouraged to know that we cannot wait. While we cannot wait, we must be a community to unite our nation and live the nonviolent way. We encourage you to plug in with the King Center and join us and meet us in building the beloved community. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.